Good morning, 7th grade. Hopefully you guys had a good Monday. Before we start, I wanted to point out something that I thought was really cool in yesterday's CNN 10. Hopefully you guys watched it. What was cool about CNN 10 yesterday was they actually started to talk about how they finally made a map of the moon. And this is the first time they've ever released a map of the moon. And they use all the findings that they had from the other missions, and they finally made a map. And this is kind of cool because remember, back then when people started to make maps, that just led to the exploration of the world. So now that we have a map of the moon, hopefully we can go and start to explore the moon more and learn something about the moon, and who knows where this is going to happen or affect us in the future. So that was something that I thought was really cool. So if you haven't checked it out, please go ahead and check it out. Anywho, getting into the lesson. Yesterday we talked about the Mayan civilization and how it declined, and how there was 3 different theories about how the Mayan civilization declined, but they're not too sure which theory it really is, because they think it could be a mixture of all 3. So the first theory was that it was because of the warfare, the increased warfare. They pretty much destroyed themselves. Remember, they burned down their farms and they destroyed all cities, so this could possibly be the reason. The second reason that they thought was maybe that they thought the kings were treating the people really badly, which they were, and they led to an internal rebellion or people just left. The third theory was it could possibly be of climate change. Back then they experienced this long drought that they found out in history. So maybe this drought led to no food and they couldn't support the food, so everyone had to leave their villages and disperse. So that could be the theory as well. We're not too sure, it could be all 3. I was really excited to hear some of you guys of what you guys thought, and you guys did have some really cool answers. So thank you guys for putting that. But anywho, let's go ahead and review the questions from yesterday. Number 1, why do you think scientists are not sure what caused the end of the Mayan civilization? Scientists are still not sure what caused the end of the Mayan civilization because they have to gather all these artifacts and all these fossils and their findings, and based on what they find, that's how they can decide what happened based on what they find. So that's why they're just not too sure, because there's not anything written, it's just what they found. Number 2, in what ways did the growth of cities, warfare, and drought possibly affect civilization? Some of these things, like the growth of cities, welfare, drought, could have possibly affected the Mayan civilization because they either made it too hard to produce enough food, or maybe it was just too hard for them because the population was growing too much that they didn't have enough food. So all this stuff would have been a possibility. Number 3, why might scientists study to find out the end of the Mayan civilization? Some scientists may still try to find out what ended the Mayan civilization because they are curious. Also because Mayan artifacts such as carvings, writings, artwork, ruins, soils, history, and weather and climate patterns, they want to see what actually happened. They're still curious. They're not just going to close the case. They want to see what actually happened in this region. Okay? So today we're going to continue with the Mayans, and we're actually going to start to learn about their society. We're going to learn about their 2 different class systems. And when we learn about the 2 different class systems, we'll see how maybe people rebelled against the upper class. So we're going to talk about that today. So today, what our objective is going to be is we're going to be able to describe or distinguish the different roles in the Mayan society and how they're based on a complex class structure. So today, we are going to talk about the Mayan life and their society. Building background. Fancy clothes and important responsibilities show the roles of the kings and priests played in the Mayan society. The roles played determine what their daily life was like. So back then the kings were always dressed in gold, fancy stuff, show off their riches, and that showed their power. So we're going to talk a little bit about their class system today. So in the Mayan society, they had a really complex class structure. As you might expect, life for the upper class greatly differed from the life of the lower class, and we're going to see that to this day. So the upper class of the Mayan society included different groups of people. The king held the highest position, just like most places. So the king had the highest position in society. Then it came the priests, then came the warriors, then came the merchants, and they all were part of the upper class. So we're going to talk about each of them individually now. So the Mayans believed that their rulers were related to the gods. For this reason, rulers were often involved in religious ceremonies, they led battles, and as the richest people in the Mayan society, rulers had beautiful clothing and jewelry. So kings wore huge feather headdresses, capes, cotton jaguar skins, feathers, and pretty much they were treated like gods. So people were making offerings to them, sacrificing to them, because they believed that the kings were related to the gods. And you can tell definitely by how they looked or who the king was by just how they dressed. The next thing we're talking about are the priests. And the priests were usually born into the role, so it was almost like you didn't choose to be a priest, you were born into it. They led religious ceremonies. They were also the most educated people in the Mayan society. So priests, they used their knowledge of astronomy and math to plan the best times for religious ceremonies. So they looked to the stars, they looked to the math, and they would time these things, these ceremonies, just because they wanted to make sure it was the perfect time. They get the right sunset, get the light shining, everything like that was perfect, and that's how they decided when and where to have their religious ceremonies. The next people that were in the upper class were the professional warriors. And these warriors, as you can see there, kind of decorated themselves in like jaguar skins, but we'll talk about that. So professional warriors, they fought in battles against other Mayan cities. In battle, these warriors wore animal headdresses, jade jewelry, jaguar skins, and they painted their bodies red and black, or red and orange like that. And that's just symbolized that they're warriors. And they did it for camouflage, but also because of the jaguar. If you know, the jaguar is really popular symbol in these cultures. The next we're going to talk about are the merchants. And the merchants often, they directed the trade among the cities, so they're really valuable to the people. They organized and transported, distributed goods. They also supervised the people who carried the goods, so acted like as security guards. And together, the members of the upper class, they controlled most of the politics, religion, and the economy. So the people in the upper class, the kings, the priests, the warriors, and merchants, they all played a huge role. And remember, like we talked about in society, all these have to do with it. Like the warriors were part of the warfare, the merchants were part of the trade, and the priests were part of the religious ceremony. So all of them had a huge role in the Mayan society. So now we're going to talk about the lower class. And remember, their lifestyle was completely opposite of the upper class. So let's talk about the lower class. So although the upper class had the most power, most Mayans belonged to the lower class, such as lower classes as farming families. These Mayans lived in small houses outside the city. Girls learned from their mothers how to cook, make yarn, weave, take care of the house. Women cared for the children. And while the women were doing all this, the men crafted the tools such as knives. They provided food for their family. They also spent a lot of time hunting and farming. Okay, so they kept small gardens next to their houses and worked together to farm larger fields. But most of the time they're working and trying to get food and taking care of their family. Farmers also had to give some of their crops to their rulers. The lower class Mayans had to pay their rulers with this thing, and they had to pay their rulers with goods such as salt and cloth. So they had to work on building temples, palaces, and other buildings. They also had to serve in the army during times of war, and if captured in battle, the lower class usually became a slave or was killed and sacrificed to the other kings. So life in the lower class, you had to work your own food, you had to get your own food, you had to farm your own fields, and also you had to give stuff to your rulers. You had to pay taxes, but it wasn't really taxes. Their taxes was putting them in goods such as cloth and salt. And then not only did you have to take care of your own house, but you have to go and build the temples, the palaces, and all the other buildings. So these lower class people were pretty much doing everything for the upper class, which kind of sucked. So if you look at the picture to the right, that's actually one of the temples that they built back then that's still standing from the Mayan Empire, so that's kind of cool. I actually did talk about this already, I'm so sorry. But they had to build buildings, temples, and other thing like that, and serve in the army. Another thing that they did was the slaves. We'll talk about the slaves now. So the slaves, they held the lowest position in society. Orphans, slaves, children, and people who owed money to the government became slaves. So if you were farming and you could not pay your taxes or you couldn't give crops to the king, you would just become a slave. So slaves, what they had to do is not only had to work, but they had to carry the goods between cities. And this was a tough job because they had to travel by foot, and it was very tiring and pretty dangerous because when you're trading, you can get killed when you're transporting the goods. They also served the upper class Mayans by working as farmers and household servants. So slaves pretty much did all the dirty work. The lower class supported the upper class with food and labor, but the upper class also helped the lower class. For example, the upper class Mayans led religious ceremonies that vital to the daily life for all classes of society. So even though the lower class had a difficult time and they had to serve the upper class, one thing that they did do for the lower class was provide religious ceremonies so they can stay in tune with their gods and they can still keep on track with their religious society. So as a quick review, today we talked about the different class systems and how the upper class is completely different from the lower class. The upper class consisted of the king, the priest, the warriors, and the merchants, and that was made up the upper class. The lower class was typically the majority of the people, and the majority of the people were farmers or slaves. And we saw the relationship between them and how they worked with each other. So that's kind of what we talked about today. We talked about their society between the classes. For homework, I would like you guys to answer these questions. Number 1, how might one become a slave in the Mayan society? So when would you become a slave? How would you become a slave? Number 2, in what ways did lower class Maya support upper class Mayans? So how did the lower class support and work for the upper class? And number 3, in what ways did the upper class Mayans help the lower class Mayans? So go ahead and review the notes. If you don't remember, you can always ask me a question. So that concludes our lesson for today, talking about the upper class and the lower class. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. I'm always here to help. If not, you always have the video and the notes to refer back to. Also, don't forget, tomorrow we are going to have another live class session. Wednesday at 10 a.m. 7th grade, we are going to have another live class session. It'll be the same as on Friday, where you guys will be answering questions and everything like that, interacting, and having a partner talk, and then sharing out. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys all there. And if you have no questions, I hope you guys have a great Tuesday, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow morning.